Darren Till has one of the most tragic downfalls in MMA history. Just 5 years ago, Darren had it all: endless talent, overwhelming charisma, and a chip on his shoulder. But today, at only 30, Darren is already seen as a has-been and someone that's washed up. But why? What happened? Was it just the relentless and unforgiving meat grinder that is the fight game, in which 99% of men fail to reach greatness? Or worse, was it a matter of his own doing? Wasted talent, squandered potential. Today, that's what we're here to figure out. So without further ado, let's dive into the story of Darren Till. Now keep in mind, when Darren Till made his UFC debut in 2015, Conor McGregor was the biggest star in the sport. Go figure. So you already know that there was quite the demand for strikers with a brash personality and a thick UK Irish accent to go with it. And at a young age of 23, Darren fit the mold. And pair that with the fact that he was a southpaw with dynamite in his left hand, and the rest was history. Within his first 4 fights in the UFC, Darren Till put himself in the spotlight, earning a main event against the legend Cowboy Cerrone. Now at this time, Conor had been out of the game for a year, and the UFC needed new stars. So I'm guessing they knew exactly what they were doing with this matchup. Till went out there and smoked him in the first round. He kind of just walked him down and bullied him. After all, Cowboy was a former lightweight, and he looked tiny compared to Darren Till in the cage. But it wasn't only the power that made Till look good. It was the finesse, the way he stood tall and had an unbeatable aura about him, similar to that of Conor's. You could tell that at this point in time, Darren had the utmost confidence. He walked around as if he was indestructible, chest high, chin in the air, and impenetrable self-belief. He was also massive for the welterweight division, which gave him a bit of an intimidation factor, and he was fully aware of this, which is what led to his nickname, the Gorilla. Darren believed fully that he was destined to be the best fighter on the planet, and in his mind, he was already king. The fans had themselves a new rising star, not only with a slick and powerful striking style, but a captivating, charismatic presence. And the UFC took notice of this too, and they decided to go all in, fast-tracking Darren Till into a #1 contenders fight with no other than the legend and the striking savant, Wonderboy Thompson. Wonderboy was coming off of a dominant victory over Jorge Masvidal, and prior to that, he had 2 razor-close fights with the champ, Tyron Woodley. Thompson was at the peak of his career, while Darren was only 25. The UFC booked the fight as a main event in Darren's home city of Liverpool, for they knew a rowdy Scouse crowd was the perfect backdrop for the hungry man, Darren Till. With that kind of crowd and his self-belief and energy, a win was bound to make for an overwhelming post-fight moment on the mic. Days before the fight, Darren looked drained, and people started to catch on. You see, Darren had been talking about how big he was for the welterweight division for some time now, and given that he was now in the spotlight, his weight cuts became the talk of the town. This would go on to plague Darren Till's entire career at welterweight, and from here on out, his weight cuts were just as much of a focal point as his fights. According to Darren, this was the hardest weight cut that he had ever had, for he was seen collapsing on a treadmill the night before weigh-ins. And Darren ended up missing weight, coming in 4.5 pounds over the limit, but the fight went on as scheduled, and Darren proved that he belonged, having an absolute chess match with one of the best strikers to ever step foot in the octagon. So for Darren Till to go tit for tat with him was incredibly impressive and testament to his potential. After 4 razor-close rounds, Darren landed a knockdown in the 5th, which ultimately won him the fight. And when Darren got on the mic, the rest was history. I call this the speech heard around the world. On that day, the legend of Darren Till was born. He went on to fight Tyron Woodley 4 months later at UFC 228. Woodley wasn't exactly the most beloved champion, and the UFC knew this, which is why they were eager to get him out of there. They put all of their trust in Darren Till, and the fans were on board too. After all, if Darren could stand toe-to-toe with Wonderboy, he sure as hell would be able to land on Woodley. And Darren came into fight week with unshakable confidence, fully believing that he was going to spark Woodley out cold in the first round.
Every dog has its day, and your day is going to come September 8th.
As usual, the weight cut became the hot topic of the week, and it made its way into every conversation surrounding the fight.
You told us yesterday you were 182 in the morning. Are you willing to share where you were this morning?
Can't say where I was this morning, but I'm getting there.
What do you weigh right now? Tell me that number, Darren.
Thankfully, Darren made weight, and the world was on the verge of having a new star. And I remember thinking to myself at the time that this was Woodley's toughest matchup ever, that he had finally gotten an opponent with some serious firepower to contend with him. Darren not only lost this fight, but had one of the worst performances in UFC history. Not only did he get brutally knocked down, beat up, and submitted in the second round, but he also failed to land a single strike. And it's not even like he was out there swinging and missing either. He literally only attempted 6 strikes in total throughout the whole fight. It literally could not have gotten any worse. And although the fans were happy for Woodley because he had finally put on an entertaining performance, you couldn't help but feel sorry for that man Darren Till. But hey, bright future. Still only 25. He's surely gonna kick Masvidal's ass, right? I mean, they're practically setting Masvidal up for failure. Or at least we thought. The UFC headed back to the UK, and Darren once again set to headline against Jorge Masvidal, who had just come off an embarrassing loss to Wonderboy. Jorge was seen as a journeyman, a stepping stone to get Darren Till back on track, exactly what the UFC wanted. And interestingly enough, the current champion today, Leon Edwards, was on the card and had a great back and forth with Darren at the press conference.
What? You're not on my level. Mate, you took your fucking 5 rounds to finish an old cowboy. I destroyed him in 1 round.
Does anybody have the Wi-Fi password?
Knowing what we know about Leon now, pretty crazy to look back on. Darren Till had himself a freebie, a layup, and he proved this when he marched across the octagon and knocked Jorge Masvidal on his ass in the first minute of the fight. That left hand landed. And if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's the mentality that Till had thereon after, because he continued to spam the straight left right down the pipe. Although you may have a weapon that's effective, if that's all you throw, it becomes predictable and easy to counter. And Masvidal made him pay. He brutally knocked Darren Till out with a picture-perfect switch dance combination in the second round, all in front of Darren's home crowd. And just like that, Masvidal had stole a bit of Darren Till's hype and his soul as well.
All my life I've been had this crazy confidence that I'm just a superhuman being inside the octagon in life, and it got knocked a bit. I'm not ashamed to say that, and I want to get that back. It's there. I'm still that confident guy that you put me in front of everyone, I know I can beat them. I know there's something inside me that can beat everyone. It got lost a bit after the fight.
Darren decided that it wasn't worth it to continue to fight at welterweight. After all, draining yourself to the point of going blind and passing out the day before you fight just isn't conducive to fighting at your best. 185 pounds was a fresh, new journey, but going up into a bigger weight class meant facing heavier hitters, which for a guy that just got KO'd was going to test his mental game to the max. The UFC booked Darren Till for UFC 244, which was headlined by Masvidal himself. And for Darren's first middleweight assignment, the big granite-chinned bull, Kelvin Gastelum, who had just come off an all-time classic war against Israel Adesanya. And he was known for his power and durability, a terrifying combo, and Darren made it out alive, though barely, scraping by to a decision win in a very underwhelming performance that not even his own mother could write home about. To be fair, you can't be surprised to see a man fighting so tentatively after getting slept in their previous bout. I mean, even before the fight, he was a low output guy, but he took it down another notch for this one. But a win is a win, and given that he had redeemed himself, the UFC rewarded him with a #1 contenders fight against the Reaper. Whittaker was coming off of a bad knockout loss, courtesy of the newly crowned champ, Israel Adesanya, so he wouldn't be getting a crack at the belt with a win. But because Darren Till was a fresh face at 185, the UFC knew that he was next in line with a potential win over Whittaker. And Whittaker had caught on to Darren Till's skill set, And like the fans had noticed that he seemed to be rather one-dimensional, low output, and lacking a variety of attacks.
I can exploit. He's got his left hand. That's all he's got. Like everything else, I got covered. But he runs that down the pipe. I've got to be aware of that. I've got to give it the respect. But I've got so many angles he has to be.
In the first round, Darren came out strong, dropping Whittaker with an elbow. But Whittaker bounced back in the second round, dropping Till, making it an even fight going into the third. But once again, Darren only threw his left hand. You may see a strong leg kick from him once a round, a jab every 4 minutes, but for the most part, Till relied far too heavily on that damn left hand. And because of this, he lost 2 out of the last 3 rounds, and Whittaker got his hand raised. And although the fans still liked Darren and wanted him to succeed, they were also rooting for Whittaker. So it's not like everyone was too disappointed in the outcome. None of them got finished, and it was a good chess match. Neither stock really decreased that much or increased either. But it was clear that Darren was a one-trick pony. And this is where the excuses started.
Listen, I'm taking it as a win for myself as well. I've showed me level. I'm up there. I'm only my second fight in the middleweight division. I'm already right there. I just think we both won. He obviously won, but in my mind, we both won.
And although Darren would admit that the better man on the night won, by failing to accept that he was the loser was a sign of what was to come.
If my knee was a little bit better, maybe things would have been a bit different, but you know, it was a 3-2 fight for him or 3-2 fight for me, so I haven't left that fight thinking anything. He was the former.
You see, Darren had lost 3 of his last 4 fights, and the one fight in which he edged out was razor close as well. As far as potential and talent, he had it all, but he clearly wasn't where he needed to be.
I've showed that I'm one of the elites, the last guy fought, you know what I mean? I'm up there.
It's not like it wasn't anything that couldn't be fixed either. I mean, from a marketing perspective and a talent perspective, he was there, but he needed adjustments. I mean, when this man would throw knees, kicks, elbows, he'd look amazing. And given that he was so well built and athletic, he had the ability to hurt guys with these weapons too. But for whatever reason, he just wouldn't throw them. I think about it as like the sin of omission. You're losing and you're not doing as well as you could because you're omitting all of these other weapons. And this is the point in time in which a lot of guys get back to putting their nose to the grindstone, to level up, while others get content with where they're at. Darren was content with where he was at. In his mind, he was already one of the best and had without a doubt the skills needed to win on any given night against guys like Whittaker and Adesanya. And as I had said, this may have been sort of true, but it wouldn't mean shit unless he actually made some adjustments first. So did he put his nose to the grindstone? No. Darren resorted to partying like he was the king. You know, most guys would go home to their family, rest up, have a few hearty meals, and get right back in the gym. And I'm sure Darren Till did the same, but with a hefty helping of booze and late night takeout as well. We know that drinking can ruin one's recovery from training, and this couldn't have been seen more clearly in the physique of Darren Till. Remember, Darren had switched to 185 pounds because he was far too big for welterweights, and he had come into the Gastelum fight looking full and well-muscled, refreshed. But all of a sudden, Darren's physique started to look like he was actually losing muscle, which just didn't add up. Why was a guy that had recently moved up a weight class because he was literally too jacked and big for 170 looking like a middleweight pipsqueak? The only logical explanation for this was that Darren was getting fat outside of camp and drinking too often. And between 2020 and autumn of 2021, the UFC would fail to get Darren Till in the cage due to him pulling out of fights with Marvin Vettori and Jack Hermanson due to injuries. These injuries likely stemmed from the fact that he would rush into a grueling training camp after getting completely out of shape in the offseason. And you also have to keep in mind that these injuries were prohibiting him from getting better and actually skill building in the gym. In other words, Darren had put himself into a cycle of getting fat and drinking often in the offseason, to rushing into a grueling training camp and getting injured because of the fact that he was so out of shape going into these camps. And what does he do to deal with it? Back in the club, right back on the food, right back on the booze. So how does this kind of lifestyle translate into a real fight? Well, we found out when Darren made his return after a year-long layoff to fight Derek Brunson. Brunson was 37 at the time and was on a decent win streak, but wasn't seen as a real threat to Till. And although Brunson's grappling was dangerous, he had always been sloppy and hittable on the feet. And of course, in everyone's eyes, this was an easy matchup for Till, a step down in competition. And Till came into fight week looking significantly smaller than he had looked in his 2 previous middleweight fights. He looked flabby and bloated, a far cry from his old intimidating and imposing welterweight physique. And on top of that, a different demeanor altogether. His chin no longer held high, his chest slouched over. Darren was not the same man in regards to his confidence. And Darren once again went into the cage, spamming the left hand, trying to get Brunson out of there early, but it didn't work. Verderick toppled Darren over and beat him up on the ground for the first 2 rounds. Now, things took a bit of a turn in the 3rd round. Brunson came out looking exhausted, tired, lethargic, and Darren actually had a big moment, rocking Brunson with the left, but it was all for nothing, as he left himself open to getting taken down again and wasn't able to stuff the shot. Brunson took Darren Till's neck and submitted him with ease. He had now lost 4 out of his last 5 fights, and he wasn't losing to the best anymore. He was losing to the old, past their prime, sloppy, one-dimensional wrestlers like Brunson. Darren's left hand wasn't cutting it, and neither was his grappling, and he had now been submitted twice and out-grappled in back-to-back losses, given that Whitaker had also taken him down a few times. So what does Darren do? He reaches out to no other than Khamzat Chimaev. Darren flew back home for a few weeks, packed his bags, and headed out for Sweden. This was it, the saving grace, one of the most dominant grapplers of the sport, teaming up with Darren Till. It was surely going to help. Khamzat also made fun of Darren Till for being fat and out of shape, which motivated him to get his act together. Come on, fight boy! Come on, fight boy! Just being around a focused, gritty environment was perfect for Darren at the time. But keep in mind, Chimaev was gearing up to fight Gilbert Burns at the time, which was a massive fight. And it honestly seemed like Darren got caught up in being a supporting role in Khamzat's career rather than actually looking out for his own. For after a while, he kind of just morphed into Khamzat's water boy, showing up to support him at his fights, taking him out to Swedish clubs for drinks, and just kicking it around Khamzat's crew for morale. Because after the first 3 months of him hanging out with Khamzat, he seemed to get back into his old ways, drinking, eating, and doing everything but training for a fight. Another strange thing that fans started to pick up on was that Darren Till was never home, meaning he had 3 kids and a wife at home, but he was everywhere but there. You'd see Darren and Khamzat hanging out at some random MMA promotion in Dubai. You'd see him in Vegas at the Performance Institute or training in Thailand. I don't know why, but it seems like he was trying to get away from something. And constantly moving around creates chaos in a sport that requires ultimate sacrifice and structure. What had seemed like a great collaboration at first had Darren Till more distracted than ever. And Darren was no longer, in his mind, the man. He went from being the center of attention to a groupie. From wanting to be the king of the fight game to being content as just another one of the boys. Was it the fact that the UFC rushed him into a title shot, a loss that shook his confidence for good? Or was it from him taking his foot off of the gas after having close fights with the best, indicating to him that he was already at the peak? It's hard for us to answer these questions from the outside. But one thing is certain, at the end of the day, if you dedicate your life to training in MMA and all you do when you fight is throw a left hand, then that's on you. I don't understand how this man could go through an entire training camp just to spam a left hand. It makes absolutely no sense, especially when you have a Muay Thai background and an athletic build, strong legs. One would think that if you were to just throw a few leg kicks every now and then, you'd be more successful. In his last fight, Darren got dominated in the first round on the ground by Dricus du Plessis. All that training with Khamzat Chimaev looked like it went out of the window. In the second round, the left hand was on full display, as he actually had success and at one point had Dricus hurt. But once again, it's so predictable that even a rocked Dricus du Plessis had it within himself to stay in the fight. Darren got submitted within the first grappling exchange in the third round and had now lost 5 out of his last 6 fights. It was over. At the age of 30, Darren Till couldn't even hang with a single ranked opponent in an even worse division than the one in which he started.
You don't always get what you want in this life. It's tough. When I'm in the gym sparring with all these best guys around the world, I'm in my element, and then when I step there in the octagon, I just can't seem to put things together.
All the partying, excuses, and omitting the use of other weapons in the cage had led to his demise. So as far as I'm concerned, his talent was in a way wasted. And that being said, the fight game is brutal. Most men never get into the rankings in the first place. And I can only imagine what his career would have looked like if he had actually threw more than a left. Or what it could have been if he had taken on a few more contenders before getting a crack at Tyron Woodley. Either way, Darren will be missed. And he's still only 30, and it's not too late for him to get his body back on track. Time will tell.